Hi guys, welcome to today's lesson on adding and subtracting fractions. Now this can be slightly more complicated than multiplying and dividing, but it is an equally important skill, and you will encounter adding and subtracting in a number of different situations that involve fractions. The most important thing to remember when we do try to add or subtract fractions is that you can only continue if the denominators are the same. So if, for example, we had 1 over 5 plus 2 over 5. We can add those quite simply because the denominator is the same. It's 5 in both of the fractions. All we then have to do is add our two numerators together and we keep the denominator the same. So what we end up with is 1 plus 2 over 5, and when we simplify that we get 3 over 5. So when the denominators are the same, we just add the numerators across and your final answer is just 3 over 5 for this question. The tricky part is when the denominators are different. So what we're going to look at in this lesson is how to change these denominators to become the same so we can then add or subtract them as we need to. Alright, so for these first few examples, we're going to be looking at what we call related denominators. What that means is that the denominator of one fraction is a multiple of the other denominator. Because of that relatedness, all we have to do is change one of the fractions so that both of the denominators are the same. If that sounds a bit confusing, hopefully this example will clear things up a little bit. If we have 1/4 and we want to add 3/8. Now those denominators are not the same, so we can't just simply add those numerators yet. What we need to do is try and figure out how we can make this 4 and 8. What number can we multiply 4 by to reach 8? And if you think about it, that number is 2. But we can't just times 4 by 2, we have to times the top of the fraction, the numerator, by 2 as well. So our first line of working out is 1 times 2 over 4 times 2. And then we add the 3/8, which stays the same. Then all we need to do is simplify the top and the bottom. So 1 times 2 would be 2, 4 times 2 is of course 8, and then we add the 3 over 8 as well. Now, the denominators are the same, they're both 8, which means that we can just add the numerator across, just like we did in that very first example. So what we end up with is 2 plus 3 over 8, which just equals 5 over 8. Alright, so I have an example here of adding fractions with related denominators. So if you would like to, you can pause this video now, jump ahead and give it a go on your own, and you can come back and check your answers. Otherwise, I am about to work through this on the board. You can follow along and take notes in your book as we go. So our first question is 5 over 14 plus 1 over 7. Now obviously these denominators are not the same, so we can't just add the numerators across as we did before. What we first need to do is multiply 7 by a particular number to reach 14. Now if you think about it, to get from 7 to 14, you need to times by 2. But we can't just times the bottom by 2, we also need to times the top by 2. So our first step will be to write 5 over 14 plus 1 over 7, but we're timesing the top and the bottom by 2. On our second line, all we need to do is simplify the top and bottom on the right. So 1 times 2 would become 2, and 7 times 2 would become 14. Now if we have a look, our denominators are the same, they're both 14, so now we can very simply add the numerators across as we did before, and we end up with 5 plus 2 over 14. When we simplify the top, we end up with 7 over 14, and that isn't our final answer because we can simplify 7 over 14. If you look at it very carefully, all we need to do is divide both the top and the bottom by 7, and we end up with 1 over 2. So our final answer for this question, 5 over 14 plus 1 over 7 is equal to 1 over 2. Alright, for our second example, we're going to look at a subtraction, still using related denominators, and you'll find that it's completely the same as addition, except instead of adding the numerators, eventually we will just subtract the numerators. Again, if we have a look, the denominators are different, so we can't just subtract it straight away. What we need to do is figure out what do we multiply 5 by to reach 20. And if you think about it, 5 times 4 is 20. So what we need to do is times the top and the bottom by 4. So our very first step is 2 times 4 over 5 times 4, and the 7 over 20 stays the same. Our next step is just to simplify the top and bottom. So 2 times 4 would become 8, 5 times 4 would become 20. The 7 over 20 stays the same, and now you can see that we have the same denominator. We have 20 on both sides, so then we can just subtract the numerator across, just like we did with addition, but this time it's a subtraction. So 8 take away 7 over 20. Another important thing to remember is that the denominator stays the same. We don't do 20 take away 20, we just leave it as 20. 8 take 7 is 1, so our final answer is just 1 over 20. So that was how to add and subtract fractions with related denominators. I have 3 questions here for you guys to work through if you would like to. Otherwise, I am going to move on to adding and subtracting with unrelated denominators. Now this can be a little bit more complicated, so I would recommend watching on and giving some more questions a go.